Breakfast is not just the most important meal of the day, it is also the source of countless memories. For those who lived through the 80s, breakfast was a lifestyle that ranged from insane combinations to regular old cereal. Have you ever heard of the weird and flashy meals people ate in the mornings back then? Where are they now? Stick around as we peel back 25 forgotten breakfast foods from the infamous 80s. 25. Toaster strudel.
Kevin! Toaster strudel, yeah?
The breakfast pastry needed you to do just one thing: apply the icing. Launched in 1985 by Pillsbury, it was marketed as the flaky, fruit-filled alternative to your standard toaster pastries. It was a brilliant idea, really, because how was it possible that it convinced us that frozen dough could replace a home-baked breakfast? It was prepared by heating the frozen pastries in a toaster and then spreading the added icing packet on top. For some reason, people found joy in that sweet, awkward ritual of spreading the icing with the accuracy of a surgeon. And let's be honest, no matter how careful you were, there was always that one side that got way too much icing, while the other was left high and dry. But close enough was good enough, right? Though it's still hanging around today, toaster strudel has faded into the background of the frozen breakfast aisle, waiting to be rediscovered as the bundle of yumminess that it is. Up next, we have an alternative breakfast that shocked us with a hyper-sugary spin on regular cereal. 24. Honey Nut Cheerios.
Big news, America! Back for a limited time, we've changed the shape of Honey Nut Cheerios.
Maybe someone in the 80s, though regular Cheerios were just a little too healthy for them. Introduced in 1979, this cereal hit its stride in the following decade, when people told themselves that adding honey and almonds to their breakfast would make it a healthy option. Never mind that the almonds were mostly there for flavor, and the honey was so sugary, you'd think you were starting your day with dessert. Still, there was something magical about those tiny golden rings. You'd pour yourself a bowl, promising to stick to the suggested serving size, only to end up with a mountain that could feed a family of 4. The milk would soak in just enough to soften the crunch without turning the whole thing into a soggy mess. And of course, there was that bee mascot Buzz, cheerfully reminding us to buy yet another box, even though we just got one last week. While Honey Nut Cheerios are still around today, the 80s were certainly their glory days. Back then, it was practically a lifestyle that you shared with friends at school. Much like a bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios, our next entry is a breakfast option that meant you were ready to take on the world. 23. Pop-Tarts.
Look at that sweet frosting and filling. That's what makes Pop-Tarts such a great snack.
Pop-Tarts were the ultimate no-fuss breakfast. Kids loved them, and adults couldn't get enough. They started off in the 60s, but only gained their flowers by the dawn of the 80s. They were essentially 2 layers of pastry, but they had just enough filling to make you believe you were eating something better than sweetened cardboard. And let's not forget the frosting, a thin layer of sugar glaze that somehow melted in the toaster, but remained cool enough to burn your mouth. The real charm of Pop-Tarts was the various ways you could eat them. You could toast them for that homemade touch, or eat them straight out of the foil like a savage. Either way, they were quick, reliable, and just sugary enough to give you a jump start. Back then, Pop-Tarts had flavors like strawberry, brown sugar cinnamon, and the highly controversial chocolate, proving there was no limit to what people were willing to consider a breakfast food. If you think eating a Pop-Tart for breakfast is weird by today's standards, then wait till you hear what our next entry is. 22. Breakfast pizza.
Morning, dear. What's for breakfast?
Mama John's Pizza Bagels.
Why should lunch and dinner have all the fun? While this might sound like a modern invention, breakfast pizza was making waves in the 80s because somehow the kids back then convinced their parents that pizza could be considered a perfectly acceptable morning meal. Imagine, if you will, the classic pizza crust topped with scrambled eggs, sausage, bacon, and cheese. It was the essence of last night's dinner combined with the thrill of breakfast, as if someone decided to merge the 2 most important meals of the day into a single, greasy, cheesy masterpiece. And it was good. So good, in fact, that it would make you question all of your previous breakfast choices. The beauty of the breakfast pizza was its flexibility. You could have it with a side of hash browns, or, if you were feeling adventurous, throw on some extra toppings like pepperoni, tomatoes, or peppers. The idea was to make sure that even if you had zero interest in eating anything remotely resembling a traditional breakfast, you could still get all your morning nutrition, even though your doctor might collapse if she hears what you're doing. Speaking about a breakfast choice that could make your doctor weep with despair, our next forgotten breakfast option is right up that alley. 21. Toaster pastries.
Pop-Tarts toaster pastries.
These were basically toaster strudels on steroids. The 80s couldn't really stay away from popping things into toasters. Before the days of gluten-free everything, there were toaster pastries, the prepackaged marvel that gave us pastry magic with the convenience of a toaster. These little rectangular delights were essentially a thin pastry shell with a filling that varied from fruit to, occasionally, something that tasted vaguely like chocolate. The true magic of toaster pastries lay not in their ingredients, but in their preparation. Pop them into the toaster and they'd come out hot, slightly crispy on the outside, and, if you were lucky, with a filling that hadn't exploded everywhere. The key to a good toaster pastry was in the icing. Sure, it was mostly sugar with a touch of food coloring, but it was that glossy, sweet layer that made the toaster pastry feel like a treat, rather than just a quick breakfast. And let's not forget the occasional sprinkles that made it a worthwhile surprise. If we're talking about surprises, then the sprinkles on toaster pastries pale in comparison to the shocker that is our next entry. 20. Sausage biscuits.
Okay, so today we're making, this is the actual name, the McDonald's sausage biscuit with egg.
Whether they were enjoyed on the way to school, in the middle of a workday, or as a midnight snack, they represented a time when breakfast could be eaten anywhere. It was an experience wrapped in flaky, buttery layers and stuffed with sausage that had more flavor than most of the other breakfast options combined. A biscuit so tender it practically fell apart at the touch of your tongue, encasing a patty of sausage seasoned to wake up your taste buds. This was the glory of sausage biscuits. No fuss, no muss breakfast bliss. They were often served as part of a drive-through breakfast menu or available pre-packaged for the microwave. Sausage biscuits were as convenient as they were comforting. They were the perfect solution for those mornings when you wanted something satisfying but didn't want to deal with the mess of a full breakfast setup. A mess which our next entry gave us more than enough of. 19. Pancakes with syrup. Before you say anything, I know pancakes with syrup are as old as time and even still popular today, but no one did it like those food lovers in the 80s. Back then, these fluffy golden discs of carbohydrate heaven were often stacked high, dripping with syrup that seemed to defy gravity as it pooled on your plate. The process was as simple as it is today. Whip up a batch of pancake batter, pour it onto a griddle, and cook until golden brown. Those in the 80s preferred a stack of pancakes so light and airy that you might think they floated to your plate, but the main celebrity was the syrup, a sugary, viscous liquid that transformed the eating experience. And let's not forget the butter. No pancake was complete without a pat of butter melting into the surface, creating a dish that made you forget about all those New Year's resolutions. Whether you went for maple syrup or fruit-flavored syrup, it didn't really matter. It was the perfect breakfast, and that's all you needed to know. While you share that memory with kids today, there's a breakfast we took back then that might have them wondering what on earth was going on in the old days. 18. Bagels with cream cheese.
So for this video, we're gonna make bagels with cream cheese.
They were the perfect blend of chewy and creamy. Indulgent, yet somewhat refined. Bagels, with their slightly crispy exterior and chewy interior, were a delightful departure from the usual bread. They were often toasted to perfection, creating a satisfying crunch that held up well against the creaminess of the spread. And then there was the cream cheese so smooth that it transformed the bagel into something special. Whether you opted for plain cream cheese or ventured into chive or veggie, it was a topping that elevated your morning. You could keep it simple with a plain bagel and classic cream cheese, or get adventurous with an everything bagel and a generous dollop of herb-infused cream cheese. When last did you have a bagel for breakfast? If it's been a while, then our next entry is definitely something you might not have thought about since the last time you ate it. 17. Fruit roll-ups.
The Fruit Roll-Ups Factory puts their latest invention to the test.
The concept was ingeniously simple. Take fruit, dehydrate it until it's as thin as a sheet of paper, and then coat it with enough sugar to make you wonder if you were eating candy and not fruit. The product was snack that was as fun to unroll as it was to eat, but it was definitely not a sustainable breakfast option. The process of peeling away the wrapper and carefully unrolling the strip had you salivating so much that you wished you could just pop it in your mouth, wrapper and all. Fruit roll-ups came in a variety of flavors. Whether you went for the classic strawberry or something more exotic like fruit punch, there was a flavor for every breakfast mood. And don't forget the occasional temporary tattoo sheets that came with some varieties. That one had kids going crazy, even though parents hated it for putting future tattoo ideas in their kids' heads. Up next is a much simpler breakfast option, but that didn't make the concept any less crazy. 16. Lucky Charms.
Unicorns, rainbows, and tasty red balloons. That's
pass me Lucky Charms!
At its heart, Lucky Charms was a relatively straightforward breakfast cereal. It was a blend of toasted oat pieces and marshmallow charms in various shapes like hearts, stars, and moons. The idea was brilliant. Mix a decent enough oat cereal with so many marshmallows that you might as well be eating candy for breakfast. The magic of Lucky Charms was its ability to turn a mundane bowl of cereal into a sugary comfort food. As kids, we would pour out our cereal and dive straight into the search for those yummy marshmallows. The milk would turn a vibrant shade of pastel by the end, and we'll slurp it all up and ask for seconds. The cereal's mascot, Lucky the Leprechaun, was a fun character we loved to see on the box. With his mischievous grin and playful antics, he promised that breakfast could be as bright as his elusive pot of gold. And while the oat pieces were more functional than exciting, they provided the perfect base for the real stars of the show. Up next is a cereal that was the equivalent of wearing a pair of sensible shoes. It was practical, good for you, and a little bit unexciting, but at least it made you feel like you were starting the day on the right foot. 15. Grape Nuts.
At breakfast, give me the solid cereal. Grape Nut cereal.
Introduced in 1897, Grape Nuts was the cereal that marketed itself as a health food while making no actual effort to taste like anything other than a bowl of crunchy pebbles. The name Grape Nuts is a bit of a misnomer. There are no grapes or nuts in sight. Instead, it's a blend of whole grain wheat and barley, baked into a hard, nutty crunk. The texture was often described as tooth testing, and you could be forgiven for thinking you were eating a bowl of granola mixed with gravel. Despite its scary texture, Grape Nuts had a large fan base, especially in the 80s. Its supposed health benefits were a big selling point. It was loaded with fiber, iron, and whole grains. It promised a breakfast that would keep you feeling full. The cereal's ability to absorb milk turned those crunchy pebbles into a surprisingly chewy breakfast. Even if it meant sacrificing a bit of taste, Grape Nuts was the cereal you ate when you had no other choice. Luckily for us, it was not the only choice in the 80s. Up next is a cereal that paved the way for tasty cereal options all over the world. 14. Cocoa Puffs.
To keep me from going cuckoo for the great chocolatey taste of Cocoa Puffs,
When it came to Cocoa Puffs, a sugar rush before noon was not only fine, but desirable. Introduced in 1958 and reaching peak popularity in the 80s, Cocoa Puffs were that equivalent of an indulgent chocolate bar that passed as breakfast. These little puffed balls were coated with just enough cocoa to turn your milk into a chocolatey river. The cereal itself was less focused on nutritious value and more about the pure, unadulterated pleasure of chocolate. The mascot, Sonny the Cuckoo Bird, was the embodiment of breakfast joy. His relentless pursuit of Cocoa Puffs and his signature catchphrase, "I'm cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs," was so popular that kids were shouting it in their sleep. While Cocoa Puffs are still around today, it just doesn't slap as hard as it did back then. Maybe there's some secret ingredient they are missing? Who knows? All I know is that when it came to breakfast options, this was a very strong rival to the cereal coming up next. 13. Corn Pops.
Was that thunder?
Sweet corn pops.
Part of a totally nutritious and delicious breakfast.
Gotta have my pops.
Corn Pops took the cornflake and turned it into a sweet, crunchy sensation that stormed the world by surprise. Debuting in 1951 as Sugar Pops and rebranded as Corn Pops in the 80s, Corn Pops were the equivalent of a kid's sugar-coated dream. They were crisp, golden corn kernels with a touch of caramelization that made them addictive in the best way possible. They were puffed to perfection and provided a satisfying crunch without the need for dental work after like the grape nuts we talked about earlier. The marketing for Corn Pops in the 80s was as lively as the cereal itself. The ads featured energetic kids who were clearly having the time of their lives with the mascot, Cornelius. Cornelius was a cartoon cowboy that embodied the playful spirit of Corn Pops. You somehow felt like you were sharing every bone with him. His cheerful demeanor made Corn Pops seem like the kind of cereal that was just as much about having fun as it was about eating breakfast. Sometimes, a little bit of cereal and a whole lot of crunch were all you needed to start the day on the right note, which is probably why our next entry is an eternal hit. 12. Raisin Bran.
Kellogg's Raisin Bran Crunch. 2 scoops of delicious.
Raisin Bran was essentially a fusion of 2 key ingredients, bran flakes and raisins. The bran flakes were crunchy and, let's be honest, not exactly the most exciting part of the meal. They were there to provide a hearty dose of fiber, which made you feel like you were doing something good for your digestive system. The raisins, on the other hand, were the sweet, chewy nuggets that made the whole experience just a tad more bearable. The raisins were generously sprinkled throughout, ensuring that every bite bite had just the right amount of sweet contrast to the slightly bland bran flakes. It worked really well. From its inception in the 1940s, the popularity of this brand only skyrocketed until it reached fever pitch in the 80s. The cereal was a wholesome, family-friendly option with a promise of heartiness and a daily dose of vitamins. Just like the cereal coming up next, it never made you feel guilty about having a second bowl, even though we all know that second bowl is actually the third. 11. Chex cereal.
Impressive. Frosted mini Chex, taking mini to the max. Part of this complete breakfast.
Originating in the 1930s, Chex has carried millions of Americans through childhood and adulthood, but it only became a cultural icon when the 80s rolled around. Chex came in several flavors like corn, rice, and wheat. Which of these was your favorite? We all know rice was the undefeated champion, but if you make a good case, I might change my mind. Each variety offered a unique concept. Corn Chex had a light, airy crunch. Rice Chex was superior for its crispness, and Wheat Chex had a much better aftertaste. They were square-shaped, which, while not exactly revolutionary, added a bit of visual interest to the bowl. The cereal's mild flavor and crunchy texture made it perfect for mixing with everything from milk to yogurt, or, more famously, transforming into the beloved Chex Mix. That's right, the same cereal that you poured into your breakfast bowl could also be tossed with pretzels, nuts, and seasoning to create a snack that would disappear faster than you could say Chex Mix. While our next breakfast food didn't offer that kind of novelty, it was certainly more useful because you could basically take it everywhere you went. 10. Carnation Breakfast Bars.
New Carnation Breakfast Bar. The instant breakfast you can get your teeth into.
Sometimes you need a breakfast that fits in your pocket. Sometimes you need something you can offer your high school crush when they say they haven't had breakfast that morning. Carnation promised exactly that. These bars were the answer to busy mornings when a bowl of cereal just wouldn't cut it. Carnation breakfast bars were packed with a mix of grains, vitamins, and minerals, appearing in flavors like chocolate, strawberry, and apple cinnamon. Each one was designed to cater to the sweet tooth while still pretending to be a healthy choice. We all know people chose it for the sugar rush. Who could care less about healthy calories when the tummy monster was growling? They were perfect for those hectic mornings when you needed to eat on the go. You could even stash them in your bag for a snack later in the day. It was truly one of the pioneers that showed us breakfast bars didn't have to be just for breakfast. While Carnation took care of our needs from the comfort of our pockets, up next is a cereal that boldly went where no breakfast had gone before. 9. Captain Crunch.
Choose your own crunch venture with Captain Crunch.
At its core, Captain Crunch took cereal to a new level. The idea was revolutionary. Corn and oat squares, sweetened just enough to make you do a little happy dance. The cereal's texture was its defining feature. It was crispy and resilient enough to stay crunchy even after being drenched in milk. The mascot, Captain Crunch, was an integral part of the charm. With his distinctive blue naval uniform, white beard, and hat, he was the jovial captain of the breakfast ship. His character sold excitement and adventure, perfectly reflecting the spirit of the times. The commercials often showed him sailing the high seas and discovering new flavors, making every bowl feel like a voyage with the captain into the scary but ultimately delicious unknown. It got so popular that the 80s saw the introduction of variations like Crunch Berries and Peanut Butter Crunch, each with its own unique flavor profile. Crunch Berries had colorful, fruity spheres, while Peanut Butter Crunch catered to those who wanted their cereal with a nutty kick. Either way, we want all of them to be as popular as they were back then. Sure, people eat a bowl or two nowadays, but where is the devotion? Where is the passion? Why does time have to take away the best things from our breakfast tables? Before I get too philosophical, let's not forget one breakfast food that all of us are glad has disappeared forever. 8. Instant pancake mixes.
Just add water, easy pancake mix.
Sometimes you need pancakes, but you also don't have the time or energy to mix, measure, and whisk. That's where this game changer came in. Even though thousands preferred the original flavors, instant pancake mixes promised the fluffy golden spectacle of homemade pancakes. All you had to do was add water or milk if you were feeling fancy, stir, and voila, you had a batter ready to hit the griddle. This was the era when breakfast could be prepped with the same ease as opening a can of soup. You didn't have to worry about sifting flour, measuring baking powder, or any of that kitchen gymnastic. Instead, you got to enjoy pancakes in minutes. These mixes were often packaged in colorful boxes with shiny images of perfectly stacked pancakes dripping with syrup, making it seem like it was too good to be true. Maybe that's because it was. They were never able to match the finesse of homemade pancakes, but they certainly made up for it in convenience. Up next is a breakfast that took commonplace waffles to a whole new level. 7. Eggo waffles.
Breakfast that's delicious, satisfying, and already gone. Lego with Eggo.
Waffles are too good to be eaten only on weekends, and the creators of Eggo waffles probably had that in mind when they set about to create this marvel. First introduced in the 1950s, Eggo waffles truly came into their own during the 80s, when they became a staple of the frozen breakfast aisle. These little square wonders delivered homemade waffles without the mess of a waffle iron. Just pop them in the toaster, and you are done. Breakfast was served in a jiffy. Not only that, it was crispy on the outside and soft on the inside, ready to be drenched in syrup, topped with fruit, or smothered in butter. It was as if someone had finally cracked the code to make perfect waffles, and they had a bunch of flavors too. Why settle for plain when you could have blueberry, cinnamon, or even chocolate chip? The variety was endless, but if you are looking for variety in our next breakfast option, you have another thing coming. 6. Cream of wheat.
Cream of wheat hot cereal or instant mix and eat.
Introduced in the early 20th century, this unassuming cereal was the go-to for anyone seeking a breakfast that was as comforting as it was dull. Back then, cream of wheat was marketed as a warm, smooth porridge that you could doctor up with a touch of brown sugar, a dash of cinnamon, or even some fruit if you were feeling particularly inspired. You could have it plain, or if you were in the mood to live on the edge, stir in a handful of raisins or a sprinkle of nuts. It was the simplest form of comfort food. Now that the rest of the world seems to be moving at breakneck speed, we desperately need a bound of cream of wheat to give us much-needed stability. Up next is a breakfast that brought a lot more chaos than stability, but somehow people still couldn't get enough of it. 5. Breakfast burritos.
Parts of a breakfast and put them in a tortilla to make the greatest burrito of all time.
Traditional breakfast fare was too mundane, so we opted for a culinary mashup that could double as an entire meal wrapped in a tortilla. In the 80s, breakfast burritos burst onto the scene like a tornado from the middle of Mexico. They promised a little bit of everything: eggs, sausage, cheese, and sometimes even potatoes, all neatly packed into a tortilla. While eating a wrap, you never quite knew if you were going to get a mouthful of scrambled eggs or a surprise potato chunk. Their popularity got so crazy that eating one on the go became a fashion statement. It also helped that they were convenient. The burrito could be crammed with just about anything you had lying around. While you might have ended up with more filling on your lap than in your mouth, it was all part of the process. Up next is a cereal was essentially an excuse to eat dessert for breakfast without anyone judging you. 4. Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
From our crazy delicious family to yours. Crave those crazy squares.
Released in 1984, this breakfast took the idea of sweet, cinnamon-dusted toast and turned it into a sugary sensation that swept up the world by storm. After all, it came in a box with a friendly pair of cartoon chefs on the front. The cereal's defining feature was its crazy squares. Every bite was a yummy crunch you only see in ads, followed by a mini explosion of cinnamon sweetness that left a faint, sticky residue on your fingers. And let's not forget the milk. Once you'd finished the cereal, the remaining milk turned into a sweet, spiced elixir that was practically begging to be drunk down to the last drop. It's stuff like that which made it a cultural icon of the 80s, even though our next entry is a cultural icon of many decades before that. 3. Instant Quaker oatmeal.
And to me, that's worth more than all the numbers they got. Quaker oatmeal. It's the right thing to do.
Why spend 20 minutes cooking oatmeal when I can spend 2 minutes stirring boiling water into a paper packet? The concept was simple enough. Combine oats with a mysterious powdery substance, add hot water, and you had instant breakfast. And let's not forget the variety packs, which introduced us to exotic flavors like apple cinnamon and maple and brown sugar, which were essentially the same thing with different marketing spin. Of course, the reality was that instant Quaker oatmeal often left you with a bowl of something that tasted like cardboard. Sometimes, you're better off taking the original, but it seems a lot of people love this breakfast regardless. While the populace is divided on whether or not instant oatmeal should be banned, there is a unanimous agreement about our upcoming breakfast food. It should be given a Medal of Honor. 2. Applejack.
A cinnamony part of this complete breakfast.
Yo-ho! Apple Jacks, get it?
First appearing in 1965 as Apple O's, but only finding its footing in the 80s, Apple Jacks promised the taste of apples with none of the actual fruit. It was a flavor on its own. Who cares if it didn't have apples? Eating it was like swallowing a bowl of what could only be described as artificially enhanced apple flavor. The catchphrase, "taste like apples, but just don't ask where the apples went," captured the essence perfectly. It was a cereal that boldly claimed to be apple-flavored, yet was unapologetically not. Apple Jacks' marketing often focused on the cereal's unique flavor and colorful appearance. But let's face it, most of us just enjoyed it for the sugar rush and the chance to have our milk turn a suspicious shade of greenish-orange. Coming up next is another cereal that you might miss, but haven't had in a while. 1. Honeycomb cereal.
Big, big bite. It tastes right. Honeycomb bite. It tastes right.
That shape is simply unforgettable. If you close your eyes, I'm sure you can still see it in perfect HD clarity. What better way to start your day than with a bowl of tiny hexagonal sugar bombs? Debuting in 1965, Honeycomb made its mark for being an out-of-the-box option, and whenever you took it out of the box, you knew why millions of people loved it. With its catchy slogan, "Big Yeah, Yeah, Yeah," it was clear that this cereal was serious about its commitment to both size and flavor. Designed to look like a honeycomb, it boasted a crunch so distinctive that it could be heard from the next room. The cereal's flavor was essentially a sweet, sugary rush, even though we all had to pretend there was a bit of honey in here somewhere. Despite its glory days in the 80s, Honeycomb's presence has died down over the years. It's still around, but it's now a sorry face on the supermarket shelf. When last did you choose to buy a box? Next time you go shopping, at least give it a try, will ya? So, are you still loyal to any of these breakfast options? Do you think we should bring any of them back? Let us know what you think in the comments. As always, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your buddies who miss the good old days just as much as you. See you next time.